Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. Welcome back to the program. And it's that time of the day when we look at the tribute to Muslim broadcasters in South Africa. Now, all of this, as you've known throughout the last week, is an inspiration led by the memory of Ibrahim Gangat, rahmatullah alayh, the legendary presenter, radio presenter that was part of the Salam Media team until his demise last year. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant him Jannatul Firdaus. So we're looking at Muslim broadcasters across the field and going beyond broadcasters, in fact, into print and radio, TV, television, online, in all spheres of journalism in the next couple of days. Joining me today is none other than veteran journalist Fakir Hassan. He's been in the industry for the last 40 years and has had a major contribution to media and journalism in South Africa. And I'd like to know, is he online? Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. No, not yet, not yet. Okay, let's see. We're trying to get that link to him because we're live now on facebook.com/Salam Media using various broadcasting methods. This has been a challenge to all of us, including, mind you, people at the United Nations Security Council, who have also had to use platforms such as Zoom to have their council meetings amid the global lockdown. And whether it's network, whether it's the mic being on when it's supposed to be off, whether it is unclear picture buffering, all sorts of issues. And from developed countries like the United States, for that matter, you see the ambassador saying, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I can't get the picture right. Or can you please switch off the mic? Let the ambassador of France have his or her say, or let the person out of Guinea-Bissau have their say, or whatever, whichever country it is, all of them having their discussion. It rather becomes quite frantic and quite humorous as well. So we're trying to get hold of Fakir Hassan, and there I think he is joining us online. Assalamu
Yes,
alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome back to the program.
Maalaikum salam, Hassan.
All
Thank you.
right, so
I
you have
was
been,
almost ready. Hassan.
you've been in the industry for the last 40 years, right? That's a lifetime, literally. What's the
Yes,
difference
shukar to Allah.
if you have to give us a snapshot of the media 40 years ago compared to what it is right now today?
Well, all my life, I started out when we used to use things you probably haven't seen yet at your age, a physical typewriter with carbon paper and so on. No PCs or anything. So, firstly, the technology that has turned around the entire media world, not just locally but globally. And I come from an era when we were strictly controlled, absolutely controlled. You couldn't write what you want to write without being checked somewhere and being harassed, actually, having your material seized at times from security police and so on. Not just myself, all journalists, at the time. Of course, journalists who there were a batch from a certain group who were allied to the government of the time who escaped all those things, but the rest of us had to go through all those things. And seeing that change, and I've been tremendously privileged to have seen the change over those decades. Having worked in that environment and now in today's environment, and seeing how exactly it has changed, not just changed, but also brought in a whole new generation like yourself right now. And for me, the greatest satisfaction, if you were to ask me that, of what I've experienced in my lifetime as a journalist, is seeing you on air now, for example. And besides the technology that allows that, all my life I fought for two things. One, for more people, young people, especially in our community, to enter the journalistic industry. And today we see so many of them. And
Mhm.
secondly, to have the freedom to do what you wish to within allowable laws. Of course, there are certain laws which we must respect. Things like copyright. I see more and more infringement these days of things like copyright and lack of a right of reply. And perhaps as we go on talking, I might talk a bit about many years at the SABC and training people about
If I
such
can,
issues.
if I can come in there, Uncle Fakir, if you have to compare the quality of journalism from 20, 30 years ago as to what is being almost mass produced today through social media and whatever else, the juniorization of the newsrooms, the lack of depth analysis, do you pick that up in the different epochs and times?
Absolutely. You know, excuse me, the irony of that time, despite the strict control, it also involved a measure of accuracy, fairness, etc. Well, a level of fairness within the constraint that we had of the regulatory environment then being rather biased. But in terms of journalists writing or broadcasting, for that matter, there was a strict adherence to accuracy before sending things out. And these days, as you know, everybody talks about consumer journalism. Everybody is a journalist. Anybody can comment on any social media and so on. We're seeing it now with the COVID-19 experience. How much I heard you talking a little bit earlier about the things that are happening around that and all the conspiracy theories. But one thing that is not a conspiracy theory is that a lot of false information is going out on social media that is very often seen by semi-literate or illiterate people as accurate and real, you know. And then it's not helped at all by world leaders who go out telling people to inject yourself with bleach, for example. I saw reports about, you know what I'm talking about. And we saw reports of people getting physically ill with that and believing what this man said to them. Now, that is a result of the power of the media in terms of access. People have access on their mobile phones and everywhere else these days. It's so easy. In the most remote area, if you just have a mobile phone and even handheld power to it, you can get that information, which you couldn't in the past. And that is a dangerous thing, I say, because unless there is some level of control can only work in terms of how much you can control. And these days, media is extremely difficult to control. The regulators are battling all over the world. The regulations might be there, but flouting those regulations and the implementation of those regulations has become a major issue all over the world as social media and other forms of media expand. So that's a big challenge.
You were also talking about just a moment ago your training that you've done for so many years at the SABC, the national broadcaster.
Mhm.
What was your experiences there? What can you share with us?
Well, you know, strangely enough, there were people who might have been there for a few years in the newsroom, for example, who would not know exactly what the right of reply entails. Producers who make television programs always taking the side of the complainant and not allowing the person complain about a fair sort of representation on a program. And we often ended up, as you know, there's a broadcast complaints commission where I was representing all the SABC stations for the last 13 years of my 35 years there. The most fascinating part of all my jobs at the SABC. And over there, we often were found guilty of, you know, that sort of lack of a right of reply, which is so critical these days. You can't make allegations and not allow the other party to be heard as well. Although I'm not saying you should call in Lady Gaga now after what you said.
No, we leave that as analysis, purely analysis and
Yes,
conspiracy. We've got
absolutely.
no,
I was just,
no proof on that,
I was
no
just,
determined facts on that one.
yes. And I was just going to say that what you said was an analysis or an opinion, and you're absolutely entitled to that on over the broadcast airways, or whether you're writing as a journalist, you know. But when you make allegations, which is very different from opinion or analysis,
Mhm.
as you rightly point out, you were analyzing the situation correctly. So, but if you were to immediately say something like Lady Gaga has done the world a very bad thing, you know, by going and doing this sort of thing, then obviously she's entitled to a right of reply. And I'm sure you understand that fully. I don't need to
We'll never
explain
have
that.
any Lady Gaga on Salam Media. I will be sending media emails to her for the next 1 year. Please, can you have your right
Yeah.
of reply? I think we'll break the internet if we have that kind of an interview.
True.
But looking
Yeah.
at infringements and how do we go about educating young journalists? Is it a fault in the study manual that they are doing, or is it the responsibility of the senior staff as they come into an institution to guide them in the right direction?
I think it's a combination of all three factors you've mentioned there. Firstly, their formal training, their education at universities or wherever they train for journalism. Secondly, the places where they get employed. There's a responsibility on those institutions to continue continuous training, because, as you know, these things evolve over time. So that academic learning that you get at the academic institution where you studied, when you start applying it in practice, you need to constantly keep at that. And there's an obligation, I say, on the employer of a media house to continue that training with their staff. And then thirdly, the journalist, him or herself, has an obligation almost, I would say, to make sure that they abide by what they've learned and what they learned from the institution they work for, and also from their personal experience. You've got to make sure that things, the elementary things like the right of reply, and do not get personally involved. Now, as having said that, one thing I find over the last 5-6 years, I would say, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, and I'd like to, although I'm retired from the SABC 4 years ago, I still continue, as you know, with newspapers like Lenasia Times. I still work as correspondent for the Press Trust of India in South Africa and so on, at a much lower level, of course. But I've been looking for people that I hopefully could share my, I say in my knowledge and my experience, knowledge that I've acquired, the experience that I've gained is useless unless it's translated into wisdom that can be shared. So I've been trying to share this with younger people and hoping that they would do the things we do at newspapers like the Lenasia Times and stations like yours, community stations, a very important role that you fulfill in terms of community information and news. And I find increasingly a difficulty getting young people who are willing to do that, on a scale that you need to go into mosques and temples, for example, in our community to reflect on things there. And you find a religious bias sets in. You find a racial bias sets in sometimes even. And for our journalists in any community, you cannot allow that to influence your judgment or your employment or the stories that you write.
Unfortunately, due to lack of time, I mean, there's 40 years of experience that we need to really go and translate it into shared wisdom, as you say, and hopefully we'll find that space at Salam Media amongst our staff to tap into that deep well of reserves that you have, Uncle Fakir. But unfortunately, we're going to have to now. We chat again in the future, and we take you up on that sharing, inshallah, in days to come. You go well, stay safe.
Jazakallah for the opportunity. Assalamu alaikum.
Yes, that was Fakir Hassan, veteran journalist and a member of the SABC for 35 years. Can you believe that? That's almost as old as I am. My entire life spent in the company of the SABC. Can you imagine that? Wow. Amazing contribution to the South African media scape and landscape. And we continue with this slot. From here, Zarvadi, it's been wonderful being in your company for the last 2.5 hours or so. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.